Let's welcome to Open Tech Talks.tv Scott Kelly. Today is our guest. Is Scott. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. For our audience, if you can give us a brief about yourself and then where are you based?
Yeah. Well, I'm based in St. Petersburg, Florida, here in the U.S., and I run Black Dog Venture Partners, which is a technology accelerator. We work with technology companies to help them fund, scale, grow, and then eventually exit their business. I run a series of pitch events called VC Fast Pitch, which helps entrepreneurs, technology entrepreneurs, get in front of investors. And then thirdly, I run my own podcast, the Emerging Managers Podcast, which interviews up and coming venture capital firms. And so I've been raising capital and for 30 years and helping companies grow. During that time, I've raised about $5 billion in capital for these companies. And in addition to my 3 exits, helped another 30 companies exit their companies.
All right. So you're doing this from last 30 years.
Yeah, I'm an old guy. I've been doing this, quite frankly, since the 80s, but started my current firm in early 2000.
Okay. And what was the one thing which was keep inspiring you to keep, this is the right thing, I will keep doing it?
Well, I could tell you, I tell everybody I have unsuccessfully retired twice.
Hmm.
So after a very good run during the 90s and the dot-com boom, I moved to Arizona and thought I was going to retire. And after about 3 months, I started another company and ran that for another 6 years before I sold that. Fast forward, I moved to Florida from Arizona about 3 years ago, thinking I was going to retire. Found incredible opportunities here in this part of the country and decided to keep working. So I think, I love working with entrepreneurs to turn their ideas into great technology companies.
All right. So maybe as you're working with a lot of new startups and companies, so very open question. What's going on from last 2 years with the AI and Gen AI?
Well, I think the reality is a lot's going on, and for those of you listening, that artificial intelligence has been around for quite a while,
True.
probably under different names and different phrases, but the last couple of years has been transformative because the reality. Someone asked me the other day, is AI equivalent to the dot-com? I said, no, it's equivalent to the discovery of energy. It's that transformative. So I think what's happening, and as you and many listeners know, it started out with the large language models and building the infrastructure and the background of AI. But over the course of the last several months, it's really become how to apply that AI to make an existing business or existing industry more profitable with less staff, better efficiency, better access to data. And you're obviously seeing companies become $1 trillion companies. And I think the reality is probably within the next year to 2 years, we'll have $1 trillion IPO here in the United States. And probably very soon after, we'll have the first trillionaire in the world. To say AI is being transformative, it would be an understatement.
All right. So last year, have you invested in pure
Yeah,
focusing on large language models and Gen AI?
well, not so much the large language models, although we know some of the founders of those. It's really investing in and working with companies that are really applying it to an industry that has some pain points that can be solved by AI. We're working with a construction company that is using AI to provide faster access to estimates for jobs, which will save contractors billions and billions of dollars and hours of time. We have another company that is doing automating it for the sales process for the auto industry, using chatbots and AI to have conversations with potential buyers and make sure the qualified prospects are completely qualified by the time they make the purchase. So you're finding it's really dipping its toes into just about every industry you can think of.
Okay. So Namabi, in last 30 years, what was your most successful investment?
Wow, that's interesting. I've been involved. I was fortunate to be involved in many during the 90s, the dot-com era. We invested in many startups that actually went from an idea and a concept until trading on the Nasdaq for hundreds of millions of dollars. So I've been fortunate to have a few of those. Many back in the 90s, we were involved in the first online bank, which eventually got acquired. So that was really intriguing. And we've had some really interesting stories of entrepreneurs going through the entire life cycle. We had, as I mentioned, we've hosted a pitch event called VC Fast Pitch, and about 7 years ago, we had some entrepreneurs, two brothers, pitch their startup during the event. And, soon after, they raised their first $270,000 from the event. A few years later, they raised another $3 million from someone they met. A couple of years after, they sold the company for the high eight figures, and
Hmm.
they went from being an entrepreneur with no money to being a venture capital firm that's investing in startups today. That's that's
Right.
that's probably one of the stories I'm most proud of.
All right. So now, over the years, you must have observed so many challenges, while either it's from a founder's point of view or maybe from a pitch point of view. So if any
Mhm.
lessons you can share or the tips you can share for the audience.
Well, I think from an entrepreneur standpoint, it probably is in line with the pitch standpoint. I tell entrepreneurs all the time, and the irony is, I help companies get in front of investors to raise capital, but honestly, the vast majority of entrepreneurs should not go out and raise venture capital. They should just go out and build a business. And
Mm,
I think the reality is, if you can build a profitable business, two things happen. One, investors will find you instead of you searching them. And secondly, you can maintain more of your company when you eventually exit. There's many stories out there of companies that raised millions or even billions of dollars, and then the investors had all the company by the time there was a sale, and the founders were left nothing or little or nothing. And then there's stories of companies who just bootstrapped their way all the way to an exit. And by the time they sold it, they still owned, the majority, if not all the company. So I think the lesson is for entrepreneurs is really determine one, do you need to raise capital? And two, and when? And I think as you spoke about before, AI is really changing how
mm,
companies can grow and their
mhm,
need for capital. It used to be, 3 years ago, or, even a handful of times today, a company would come to me wanting to raise $5 million to build an MVP in 24 months. And if
mhm,
someone told me that today, I would say, you're insane. You can use
mm,
vibe coding and you can use AI. You don't need 50 developers. Maybe you need one project manager,
mhm.
and you can build a business that actually is generating sales without all that capital. So I think that's really sometimes the hard lesson. I think, when people raise capital, they get all this wonderful press. And
Right.
unfortunately, the media loves to cover people that raise money. They don't like to cover as many people who successfully built the company themselves.
Mm.
And I think that's the big lesson to be learned.
Okay. And now maybe for an entrepreneurs or whoever is maybe technical folks, and they're not good, very good at marketing, and you have seen so many pitches. So
Hmm.
if some technical founders or non-technical founders and they are preparing themselves for to pitch for somewhere in the world, some events. So any problems you identified while people pitch, which can be
Yes.
improved?
Yeah, I think talking about the first part of your question is entrepreneurs have to realize two things: what they're good at, but more importantly, what they're not good at. And, if you're a technical founder, you're a very good coder or a very good technician, stick to that. Bring in
Hmm.
people onto your team or bring in advisors to understand sales, marketing, accounting, legal, and the other things necessary to run a successful business. Investors don't always invest in just one entrepreneur. They invest in a team and their ability to execute. So I think that's the first thing. So I think
Hmm.
it's very important. And there's all kinds of mistakes that entrepreneurs make in pitching investors. And I tell people, if somebody wants to raise money today, start 6 months ago. And
Hmm.
start 6 months ago by doing two things: building a network or a list of entrepreneur or investors that invest in your industry and your stage.
Hmm.
Then during that 6 month period, build a relationship with them first.
Hmm.
Some of the biggest mistakes, and it's probably happening right now in my LinkedIn inbox. Somebody will connect with me on LinkedIn, and then within seconds of connect with me, they put their pitch deck in the DM. I just delete it. I don't even go any further. And the vast majority of investors do the same thing.
Hmm.
And so I think, a lesson learned a long time ago is that if you want to get money, ask for advice first.
Hmm.
And so I think that's the biggest mistake is they just do shoot an arrow and hope it hits the target. Make sure you have a really clear target and understand your target before you shoot that arrow is probably my is the biggest solution to the problem that happens with entrepreneurs.
All right. Now, maybe you mentioned the vibe coding and all nowadays you can come and pitch it. Based on your experience of last 2 years, how often you're seeing that, okay, that whoever tech or non-tech founders are coming and they're pitching you and then they're admitting that, yes, whatever we have built it, it's vibe coded and we are good to go, we can execute it. Have
Hmm.
this, you observed it, what's happening? Are they very
Yeah,
transparent that when they present it, or is just that they
yeah. I think they have to be transparent because the reality is the same thing that's happening now happened in the '90s. Is that there's a lot of companies that are building legitimate businesses, either developing AI or using AI effectively. And much like the '90s, there's a bunch of companies that just say they're an AI company or put a .ai extension on their name to get in front of people. So you have to really, at the end of the day, a smart investor is going to be able to read through that pretty quickly. If you're just putting an AI wrapper on something that
Mhm.
has no AI at all, I mean, anyone can have Chat GPT running in the background. You've got to be able to do far more.
All right. And any maybe for audience, any interesting use cases which you are observing that there is maybe industry or a set of industries where you're observing there's a more focus and the more candidates are coming?
I think it's happening a lot in the medical industry. I think AI is really helping facilitate drug discovery. I think in older industries like construction and, natural resources that haven't really been able to use, technology are now using AI to be more efficient from a staffing standpoint, get better data and be able to analyze and utilize that data better. I think that's some applications I've seen more often. It happens in financial services, for everything from doing analysis to make investment decisions with public companies to doing due diligence on private companies. There is a lot, and obviously the downside is that you're hearing stories about companies laying off people because of that.
Yeah, big time.
But I think we're going to have a shift change. I think the reality is a couple of 100 years ago, or less, people that were putting shoes on horses had to learn a new job. And same thing applies today.
But is it, in your observation, whatever the new startups are coming, are they disturbing massively the very established industries?
I agree. Yes, they are. I think, as I mentioned before, I think construction is an industry that it can be really transformative because the vast majority of construction companies have very old founders and they're going to transfer that ownership to a younger generation, and the younger generation needs to use these AI tools to increase profits, reduce costs. I think it's going to be transformative. As I mentioned, we have a company here in Tampa called AI Builder company, and the entrepreneur has had a successful construction company for a number of years, and he saw the pain point of having to put together estimates and how long and how arduous it was.
Mhm.
And so he built his own platform to take blueprints and turn them into a takeoff estimate in seconds as opposed to days and weeks. No
Mm.
contractor wants to spend their time doing estimates. They want to spend their
Yeah,
time selling and building. And so that's obviously that's a big transformative industry.
true. This is quite big challenge on benchmarking, getting estimate correct, and even okay, I'm going to launch something new, and after 3 years, 2 years, what would be the cost? How the material is going to
Right.
change, and all those challenges are the traditional way of doing it.
Yep. Exactly.
All right. So now, which you organize this pitch competition.
Mhm.
So in this pitch competition, you also invite some investors, or is it just you
Yeah.
as
So
investment
yeah.
company?
Yeah. I don't call it a competition, and let me tell
Okay,
you why.
okay.
I've been to hundreds of fish competitions, and I think and people listening who've been to a competition, they might be pitching their idea to somebody, but they're probably not pitching their idea to somebody that has money.
Hmm.
And I say it's good practice, but at some point you've got to play the game. And so 13 years ago, after going to one of these competitions, I said, look, I'm going to do it different. I'm not going to have this long vetting or application process for the entrepreneurs, but I'm going to have a vetting process for the investors and the attendees on the other side. So we typically, when we host these events, we've done 60 plus, we've done on locations around the country, and
Hmm.
we do an online event every month. We typically have anywhere from 15 to 40 investors that are
Okay.
active, accredited investors investing in early stage tech startups. So, these entrepreneurs get an opportunity to really get in front of somebody who can write them a check. And over this time, we've raised about 120 to 130 million dollars as a direct result from these events. So it's been successful, and it's more targeted, I think, and we've just provided a more efficient process to get in front of investors.
Okay. So now maybe question for as investors are not very technical, and with this new technology of generative AI, how they are validating that, okay, the founder is pitching, the idea is right, it is validated with the market, there is a quite acceptance is there, because technology is new for them as well, for investors,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
While founders are trying to cope up with the technology and to build, apply that, right, with Jenny. So how do you, how you observed it that founders are having some mindset to qualify?
Sure. Well, I think it comes down to, again, picking the right investor to present your opportunity to.
Hmm.
Because, here in the United States, we have 3,200 venture capital funds. And in addition to that, we have angel groups and high net worth individuals and family offices and private equity firms. We have a lot of different categories. But using the venture capital firms as an example, some of them, with respect, are probably just investing in someone who already invested in it, investing in a club atmosphere.
Mm.
Some of them bring in team members and have a specialty in an industry. And I think
Mm.
that's the reason why you pick that. If you are building a company in cybersecurity for the MSP space, find investors that have invested in cybersecurity or the MSP space, because then they have within their team or within their network the ability to learn what they don't know and do proper due diligence on the entrepreneurs. I think that's important. I'm seeing hints of AI helping in the due diligence and the screening process. The reality is, other investors like myself, I receive probably 500 pitch decks a month, and
Right.
it's daunting to go through them. Um, we have associates to help us go through that, but honestly, AI is probably going to take a role in that, and that's good and bad news because I think
Hmm.
AI will look at it purely from a analytical standpoint or some data driven standpoint, and but may miss out on the individual standpoint of it. So I think for the investors, the larger investors have people on staff to do this. Smaller venture capital funds rely on their network to do this. Like I mentioned, I have a podcast called the Emerging Managers Podcast where I interview newer and specialty investors. And what you find
Mm.
with them is they're not investing based on FOMO. They're investing,
Hmm.
doing on some real due diligence and really knowing the industry. So I think, I think that plays into, how to properly present to an investor. And then obviously AI is getting into that industry too. I tell people that it's a good thing I can retire because I might have to retire at some point down the line.
All right, then maybe third time you want to try out. All right. So, okay, any percentage from a founder's point of view, the more are technical focused guys due to these I, or is it not? The non-tech will also be very
Well,
active in the.
I think having a technical founder, it obviously is important.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, if you look at it from the perspective of the investor, is that there's universities around the world, around the country, that have all kinds of intellectual property and IP that's sitting on the shelf doing nothing.
Right.
So when I think if you look at it from an investor standpoint, their goal was really two things, put the money in and take the money out at a higher return. And you have to be they're pragmatic. They may not, you may love the tech. They're investing in the opportunity.
Right.
And I think that's really how you have to look at it from that standpoint as an entrepreneur talking to an investor.
Okay. So maybe over the years, you must have also got some recommendations, suggestions. So any bad recommendation which you got that okay.
Well, yeah, I think, the reality is any investor that's active out there has a
Right.
lot of losses. I tell
Hmm.
people, if you're an investor and you play baseball, if you're both at 300%, you're both going to be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, bet 300 batting average. So yeah, I mean, we back in the 90s, we were involved in companies that people don't even know about. There's a company called, pets.com. They were delivering groceries and raised millions and went bankrupt during the 90s. And, now there's Chewy. We invest we had a company called MB3, which is doing music downloads. And, they're out of business. And now they're Spotify.
Right.
Probably one of the biggest colossal failures in the 90s that I had involvement in was a company called Webvan. They were in the business of delivering groceries in 1998, 99.
Really?
They raised $1 billion and went bankrupt. And
Okay.
now you and I can pick up our phone and order groceries from
Order
7
gross.
different apps. So sometimes great ideas are just too early. And so that's been some of our experiences.
All right. So before we conclude for our call for today, so maybe if someone is from the audience and he's listening to you and they're maybe full-time employee working somewhere, but they have in the back of their mind that okay, they want to develop something, they want to have an idea, any piece of advice for them.
One, have really hard skin because you're going to hear a lot of no's. The good side of taking risk is the potential benefit. The bad side of taking risk is losing it all and having no one believe in you. You can look at companies, Jeff Bezos from Amazon talked to hundreds of investors before he had it at Amazon. So I would tell you, one, if you are an entrepreneur, um, and you want to become an entrepreneur as an employee, understand it all falls on you. You're responsible for everything. You're going to hear more no's than you've ever heard in your entire life. And you've got to be willing to get through all those no's to be successful. Just the joy of victory is nice, but the joy doesn't happen until you do all the work in the beginning.
Great, great. To get the joy of victory, you need to put a lot of efforts to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So anyone, if you want to reach out to you and maybe they want to send you the pitch deck, what is the best way to do it?
Sure. They can send me an email to scott@blackdogvp.com. They can go to our websites, blackdogventurepartners.com. If you want to learn more about our pitch events, you can go to vcfastpitch.com. And then obviously I'm on all social media channels. Just look for Black Dog CEO.
All right. I hope you'll read their pitch.
If they tell it came from you, you have my word, I will read it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate